Hailey Graf. I work for the Flathead Conservation District. Quick show of hands, who has heard of a conservation district before or knows what they are? Okay, a pretty good show. So I'm going to give you just a very brief history lesson here so you know who I am and why I do what I do. So if you go all the way back to the Dust Bowl era, the Dust Bowl was largely caused due to a severe drought, but also because of poor farming practices. So after the Dust Bowl happened and we were recovering, the country realized that we needed a way to incentivize better agricultural practices and soil and water conservation on our private property. A lot of public agencies work only on public land. So the Governor's Association created conservation districts. The Flathead Conservation District was started in 1945, so we go back quite a ways. And the conservation districts are a little bit different in each state. But in general, our mission is to help private landowners conserve the natural resources on their land. So as the Flathead Conservation District, we have a lot of landowner assistance programs. The Flathead Pollinator Initiative is one of those landowner assistance programs that I'm going to be talking about today. If you're interested in our other programs, we've got a conservation grant program, there's a seedling program, a watershed support program. There's a bunch of them that we've got. If you're interested in those, we have a table downstairs. Please stop by and talk with some of the other staff and grab a business card and give me a phone call. I'd love to chat with you guys. So now you know what conservation districts are and why we're here to help you. With that, I will get started with the presentation. I'm going to back up a couple slides. So we were asked to put these first couple of slides at the beginning of our presentation to really try to hit this point home for you all. We're here at the Free the Seeds event with the intent of closing the seed gap. So that's why we're all here. We're here to improve our natural resources, but also improve our community resiliency and our food systems. So you can close the seed gap by taking seeds today. If you haven't already, plant them this spring, let the plants go to seed later in the year, collect those seeds, and then donate them next year. If you have any questions about how to do this, there's tons of folks here. Yes? Okay, all right. There's tons of folks here who can answer your questions. And then there's also this email address that you could jot down if you wanted to for more information on this. Okay, so we're here today to talk about pollinator gardens and how you can plant them in your garden or in your landscape, no matter how big or small your space is. So why are pollinators important? Why do we care about pollinators, and why is everybody trying to create more pollinator habitat? Our pollinators matter because we rely on them for every third bite of food that we eat. So we have so many crops and different materials that wouldn't exist if we didn't have pollinators. So in your workbook you'll see, and if you didn't grab a workbook, they're up front. There's some information here, some statistics about nationally how pollinators are doing as well as in the state of Montana. So we rely on pollinators for everything from the food that we eat to our fibers, so our clothes, our fabrics, things like that, as well as materials and medicines. And without those pollinators, a lot of our natural world would decline, and we wouldn't have the culture or the economy that we've come to use today. In Montana, we have almost 40 agricultural crops that rely on pollinators, and that's just in Montana. Montana is also one of the top honey producing states, if you didn't know that. So again, without those honeybees, we wouldn't have that delicious honey. In Montana specifically, we have lots of threats to pollinators. They're the same general threats that we have nationwide. A lot of those are excessive or improper use of insecticides and pesticides. I'm not going to get into that a lot today simply because we don't have time to cover it in detail. Don't have time to do it justice. But there's also diseases and parasites and some competition from invasive species. But one of the biggest impacts that's causing declines in our pollinators is loss of habitat due to fragmentation and urbanization of our ecosystems and basically development. So that's why we're here today. We're going to be talking about what you all can do to try to improve our pollinator habitat for both our Montana native bees as well as the honeybees that are brought all around the country and the state to help with pollination of our agricultural crops. All right, so in your packet is a little bit of information, some little key cards on our Montana native pollinators. You're welcome to take a look at these. There's also a lot of great resources that are available online or through NRCS or the Montana State University Extension. There's lots of great identification guides out there, things like that. I just want you to be aware of those. Again, if you want to dive deep into any of these other things, please stop by our table downstairs and you can get some more information or some handouts from us there. Okay. So let's talk about some of the things that our pollinators need. When we talk about pollinator habitat and how to create or improve, oh, go ahead and pick up a workbook if you don't mind, folks, as you're coming in. It's all right. The first thing that pollinators need is forage, right? This is what everybody tends to think of. They need flowers. But it's important how you design the pollinator forage because you need to pay attention to bloom time, your proportion of native and non-native species, as well as your diversity. So bloom time is important because if you're only providing pollen and that forage, that sustenance for our pollinators during a short window of time, where are they going to get their food source for the rest of the year? So it's important that you plan a garden so that you have, we recommend at least 3 to 4 different species blooming in spring, summer, and autumn. There's lots of different lists, there's resources, and I can provide you with some more information on different websites that have lists of bloom time of different species so you can help plan that. We'll get more into that later. Go ahead and take a workbook. Okay, so then let's talk about why we need mostly native plants. So a lot of our native pollinators have co-evolved with our native species. So if you provide nothing but cultivars or non-native species, you may provide them with the pollen they need, but you may not provide them with the overwintering or the nesting habitat that they need. Also, a lot of our cultivars and non-native species have been selected and bred to be really showy and really beautiful, but they don't necessarily produce the same proportion of pollen as our natives. So again, there is a time and a place for non-natives and for cultivars. If you have a favorite plant that you love, by all means plant that. But make sure that you're also providing native plants for these pollinators. So let's talk about diversity too. So there's a lot of issues and challenges that our pollinators are facing, and there's a lot of different pollinators as well. So people think about honeybees, that's the one that's in the news a lot. You see lots of media and social attention on that. But in Montana, our other pollinators also include beetles, butterflies, and even vertebrates like voles and mice and things like that. So if you plant a larger diversity of species, you'll be providing forage and habitat for a larger diversity of pollinators, and also you'll have more resiliency in your own garden so that if something goes wrong, like you get a pest, your whole garden won't be wiped out. There'll be other options for those pollinators. So diversity is really important. Okay, so that's providing some food for our pollinators. But that's not the only component of habitat that we need to consider. We also need to consider where our pollinators are nesting, where they're hanging out at night, and where they're hanging out over the winter. Monarch butterflies are the only pollinator we have that migrates. All of our other pollinators hang out over winter here. So you can look at your own property and assess the areas where you have for pollinators currently. be okay with messy. See what I did there? Be okay. So some common places for pollinators to nest and overwinter is in dead trees and snags. Those look ugly, they can be a fire hazard, yes, but if you can leave some of that material standing, it's really good for your pollinators. Another one, this picture, the hole, so up on the left corner, that's a close-in picture of a hole down into the ground. A lot of our bees are actually ground nesters, and so if you can see these little holes, leave those be. Don't try to fill them in, don't fill them with water, don't flood them, things like that, because that's a native bee that's a ground nester. Some other places that are common are in the hollow pith of a lot of our woody stems. So you provide all summer long this beautiful forage, all these flowers, and then in the fall they start dying back and you think, oh, these are so messy. I'm going to cut these down and put them all in my compost. Well, what you may not realize is that some of our pollinators will have laid eggs or be as pupae in the hollow pith of those stems. So you can keep your garden cleaned up, you can keep things looking nice and manicured, but try to leave some stuff standing. And same with if you've got a brush pile, if you can leave some of that leaned up against a shed or in a nice pile that's undisturbed for the winter, things like that are what's providing our overwintering and nesting habitat for our native pollinators. So be okay with messy and leave some stuff standing. All right, so we've talked about what our pollinators need. They need forage and they need nesting and overwintering habitat. Now let's talk about how you're going to actually make this happen on your property. So, and this kind of ties in with this workbook here. The intent of this workbook is that you can take this home and do an assessment of your property and make a plan for moving forward. So you can follow along with this workbook if you want, or I can answer more questions about it afterwards. The first step is to recognize the pollinators and the pollinator habitat that you have on your property. So do a visual assessment this spring. Go back to your house and look at, yeah, I've got these containers here that I'm going to put some petunias in. Okay, that's a start. I've also got this grassy area that I've decided not to mow this year for water conservation. I'm going to let it grow. That's great. Some of our pollinators are grass specific. Not all of our pollinators key into just flowers. So assess your property, look at what you've got, and look at what you don't have. Come on in, ladies, you can take a workbook here if you want. All right, so then the second step, after you determine what pollinator habitat you have, try not to do more harm to it. So this is going to be overuse or improper use of insecticides and pesticides. Again, I'm not going to get into this too much. We don't have time to do it justice. Just know that insecticides and pesticides are designed specifically to target the systems of insects. And so if you're interested in supporting insects, don't use an insecticide. That can be difficult to try to manage your garden if you've got unwanted pests. But there are resources out there for you, and there's ways that you can do that. Some other ways to do it is to avoid overwatering. People forget about that one a lot. Like I mentioned, our ground nesting pollinators. If you overwater your lawn, you're flooding out their nesting habitat. So only use the amount of water that you need in your local area. The third one, and the biggest one, what we're going to spend the most amount of time on today, is how to provide additional high-quality habitat for them. Okay, so if you are in a small landscape, say you're living in an apartment and you only have a patio or a porch, something like that, you can still provide a lot of really valuable habitat for our pollinators. You can use a planter box or even some smaller tubs, things like that. So this is an example from someone in Lake County. They had a 22-inch by 30-inch planter, and they seeded it in the spring. So this is a picture of the seeds just starting to germinate and pop up. And then in June, you can see they also added straw as a mulch to try to keep the moisture in the soil and really do best by those seeds. So that's happening in June. By July, you can see the plants are really doing great. You've got a large diversity of plants there, lots of different stuff going on, starting to bloom. And then here's later in July, you can see a lot of those flowers coming up. The woman who had this planter box said that it was literally buzzing all summer and just full of pollinators. She had a small patio area, didn't have room to do a in-the-ground planting, but she was able to provide what pollinator habitat she could just on her back porch. Okay, if you've got a larger site, you can do direct seeding into the ground, but I'm going to warn you, there's a lot of site prep involved with this. A lot of people think that they can take native wildflower seeds and just throw it out in the grassy area behind their house, and overnight it's going to miraculously turn into this beautiful bee pasture. And that is not what happens. So unfortunately, we have noxious weeds everywhere. Raise your hand if you've got weeds on your property, right? Just about everybody's hand should be up. Okay, so our native wildflowers can't outcompete those noxious weed seeds. And so if you've got bare ground and you don't do anything with it, the weeds are going to come up before the wildflower seeds do. So there's some site prep methods that you can use to really give the wildflower seeds the best chance that they have in succeeding. So the first one is tilling. Now I know if you're going to a soil health talk, they're going to tell you that one of the basic principles of soil health is to not disturb the soil, to not till. That is absolutely true most of the time. But if you're competing with noxious weeds, you might have to start a certain area over. You might have to temporarily disturb that soil in order to long-term have better gains. So tilling is a viable option. We don't recommend that you do it every year, right? So because the more you disturb the soil and the more you break up that soil structure, the less able it is to retain water, support those microorganisms, things like that, that are so important for our soil health and the eventual success of your garden. So tilling is an option, but it's not something that you're going to use every year. Okay, and then there's solarization. So solarization, basically the idea is that you're putting down some plastic and it is going to heat up the ground and the top couple inches of soil enough that it kills off all of the seeds and the plants that are there. Now there's some specific practices that you have to use with solarization, and I can get you more information or we can discuss it afterwards if you have questions. But again, this is not something where you just put out a tarp in your lawn for a week and then you remove it and you think that you're good to go. Solarization is generally something that we recommend that you do for an entire growing season. And you use clear plastic so that it acts as a super greenhouse where it traps in the sun and the solar rays, and it heats up that ground to the point where it fries any of the plants there. So that's why you have to do it for a longer period of time. If you only do solarization for a couple of weeks, you're like, oh, it got really hot last Thursday, we should be good, right? You probably haven't killed off those seeds or the weeds. You've damaged them for sure, but we really want to just fry it. So if you're doing solarization, we recommend getting that heavy-duty clear plastic out early in the spring and leaving it spring, summer, and into the fall. Then you can do a fall planting and your seeds will come up in the next spring. So on that note, I should also mention that if you think about the physiology of our native wildflowers, they drop their seeds in the fall and then germinate the next spring. So if you're interested in doing pollinator planting with seeds, you really should be planting prior to May or wait until fall, right? If you throw down your seeds, even if you've done the best site prep you possibly could, if you throw down your seed in July or August, nothing's going to happen. They will not germinate. So, I mean, you might get some germination, but it's not going to be nearly as successful as if you waited until fall and they'll come up the next spring, or if you got after it really early this spring. Okay, so then,
Hailey,
yes.
could you say something about the black agriculture agricultural tarps as an alternative for solarizing?
So a lot of people use the black agricultural tarps with the idea being that the tarp itself gets very hot. But again, it's shading the plants below. So it's not, even though the tarp itself is very hot, the soil and the plants aren't getting that same amount of heat. So there's some, mixed reviews in the literature about whether you should be using a black plastic or a clear plastic. We're recommending that you use a heavy-duty clear plastic so that you get that, the true solarization of the sort of greenhouse effect where it's trapping that heat underneath. We think that that's how you'll likely have the most success. But if you have tried black plastic and you've had a lot of luck with it, I'd love to have a conversation with you about that. All right, so let's talk about spraying for weeds. Noxious weeds are noxious, right? And sometimes your best bet is going to be using an herbicide. A lot of people, when we talk about pollinators, get a little weirded out about herbicides, but keep in mind herbicides are designed to affect the systems of plants. Insecticides and pesticides are designed to affect the systems of insects. So if done properly with the right chemical and with the right timing, herbicides can safely be used in an area with pollinators. But again, you're going to want to make sure that you're not overusing your herbicides. You're selecting the correct one, applied at the correct rate, at the correct season. So if you want more information on noxious weed management on your property, again, I'd be happy to talk with you about that at a later date or after the workshop. I can also put you in touch with folks. Go ahead and grab a workbook. I can also put you in touch with folks from the Flathead County Weed District. They are really knowledgeable and very helpful, and they'll come out to your property and help you design an integrated weed management plan for the weeds that you've got going on and whatever your situation is. So don't be shy to reach out to those folks. Okay, so this is all the site prep. Here's an example of a property where they did, this gentleman, he actually, he sprayed in the fall, then he tilled, he planted a cover crop, which we're not getting into cover crops a whole lot here today, but they're a really useful tool in any situation. He planted a cover crop, and then the following spring, when the cover crop had died back, he tilled it again into his soil. So this, he kind of went above and beyond. But you can see this is a beautifully prepped bed ready for seeds. So this is what it looks like in the spring after he tilled in that cover crop. Again, he planted, he seeded, and then he used straw as a mulch to help keep the soil, retain the soil moisture. It also has, some of our wildflower seeds are really, really tiny, so they can blow away in the wind if you're not careful. So using a mulch can also help with that. Okay, so this is what it looks like by July. It was thick, it was lush, it's beautiful, tons of flowers, high diversity, all those things that we're looking for in a really effective pollinator garden. And this is just in the first year. It'll continue to look better year after year as the species composition changes and you get more plants coming in. Okay, so with that, I want to talk about a resource for you guys. Yes, question?
So really, if you do all this like preparation, then you can have something that goes from year to year to year. It's like,
yes. So ideally, we're planting pollinator gardens that are going to be low maintenance, require very little watering, and will, to some extent, take care of themselves year after year. Now, if you've ever done any gardening, you know that even the most lowest maintenance garden still requires some maintenance, right? So you can't plant the seed and then just walk away. You'll still need to look after it. You'll still need to take care of it. In times of severe drought, you might have to drag a hose out there and water it. But ideally, because these are natives that are adapted to our local conditions, ideally they're pretty self-sufficient. So I want to talk to you about the Flathead Conservation District Pollinator Initiative. This is a new landowner assistance program that we are rolling out today. So you, if you're interested, could be our guinea pigs for the season. So this program, if any of you are familiar with the Lake County Pollinator Initiative, Basically, we got a grant to take the program that they had developed with that conservation district and expand it out across the region. So there's numerous conservation districts across Montana that are rolling out the same program. We are really excited about it. So, okay, so the basics of this program are that we offer technical assistance to you. So we'll come out to your house, we'll look at what you've got going on, make recommendations on location, site preparation, all the things that you really need to do at your specific location to have a successful pollinator planting. So we offer that technical advice to you. And then we're also offering free native wildflower seeds. So depending on what you're looking for, we can offer a small amount to just do a backyard planting in some tubs or containers, or up to 2,500 square feet. So that's a fairly large area. We're not offering seed for areas larger than that because we've heard from Lake County that people tend to get in over their head. They think to themselves, I have an entire acre in my backyard that I don't want to mow, so I'm going to turn it all into pollinator habitat. And the site prep becomes very difficult, things like that, and they're not able to really maintain it. So we're doing smaller areas to start with this year, but it's the program where you could sign up this year, get your seed, get going, add on to it in the future years where you continue to expand your plot and your size if you want to. If you are interested in doing a much larger scale pollinator planting, if you've got the space for it and the interest, you can tack with the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. They have a program, it's called EQIP, and pollinator plantings are one of the supported conservation practices under that. I will say if you're interested in doing that and doing a large scale pollinator planting, you need to go down to the NRCS office and talk with them right away because the deadline is March 13th, which I believe is Friday. So, but that's an option, and they can provide you with financial assistance to do that. So, okay, so what seed are we giving out as part of the Flathead Conservation District Pollinator Initiative? This is our seed list. In future years, we might explore having different mixes, but this year we started with a fairly generic mix just to get the program off the ground and started. There are 3 species on here which are not native species. Those of you who know your species really well might be able to pick those out. That's the small burnet, the Phacelia, and the crimson clover. We've included those species, sorry, this is not in your packet, but we have brochures downstairs. Those 3 species we've included in this list, on this mix, to basically act as cover crops and to get your garden started. So particularly the crimson clover and the Phacelia, those will come up right away and provide really valuable forage to those pollinators while we wait for the rest of the native wildflowers to get going and get started. So they act as a cover crop by providing competition to those noxious weeds while the other native wildflowers get up and going. So this is the list that we're starting with this year. And if you want to sign up for this program, what you'll be committing to is we'll be providing, like I said, the technical assistance and the free seed and exchange. You'll sign a landowner agreement agreeing to do the site prep that we recommend to you for your property. And then you're also agreeing to let us come back and survey the site in future years and take photos. And the reason we're requiring that is because we want to continue to improve our program and improve our seed mix. And the best way that we can do that is to get data on what seeds are really doing well in our local area under different conditions, so that in the future we can tailor different seed mixes to different areas or different habitat types. So I'm really excited about this new program. We'd love to have some program participants. Like I said, we've got the table downstairs. So go visit the table, grab some business cards, some brochures, sign up for our newsletter if you guys are interested in taking other workshops through us or hearing about our events, our classes. other landowner programs that we have going on, sign up for our newsletter and you'll get all those announcements. And that sign up sheet is downstairs. So, okay, with that, let's open it up for questions and discussion. I rushed through that and threw a lot of information at you.
Do you have a problem with the clover overrunning everything else like it does in the rest of the garden?
Right, so the crimson clover, in general, around here, it'll do well for the first year, couple years after that, and it eventually mostly dies back. So the crimson clover, we haven't had a lot of issues with, but this is the type of mix that you would be doing in an area directly seeded into the ground. I would not recommend putting, like you mentioned, clover, crimson clover specifically, into a garden. It's gonna take over your garden bed. But in this area, it's acting like a cover crop, so that's what we want it to do. So, yeah. Okay, anything else? Yes?
Do you have any thoughts about, I've used straw in the past, but then learned that the straw, they treat it with pesticides. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so just like any mulch that you're using, you're gonna want to check the source of that mulch and make sure it hasn't gotten involved with chemicals. And that's not always easy to do because they sell straw in bales at the hardware store, for example, and the hardware store is not going to be able to tell you where that straw came from or how it was treated. So you definitely want to enter into things with caution. I personally haven't had an issue with the straw, but it doesn't mean that other people haven't. So it is a concern, but yeah.
And one of the challenges with straw that is certified organic, which I couldn't find any in the valley about 4 years ago, so I had hauled it in from the eastern part of the state, and it had a lot of thistle in it.
Yes.
So now I'm dealing with thistle.
Well, and there's a difference between hay and straw, keep in mind. So hay is going to have all kinds of seeds and things like that in it. Don't use your neighbor's hay as a mulch. You'll have all kinds of stuff growing. Yeah. And then, yes.
When in this area, would it be safe then to cut back the things you leave over winter for pollinators to hatch or
Right.
relocate?
So you're leaving some stuff standing, you're leaving that overwintering and nesting habitat for our pollinators, but you want to get out there and start gardening again. So about the time that you're ready to get out there and start putting new stuff in the ground is the same time that our pollinators are emerging and looking for that new stuff. So when you're ready to go out there and get going in your garden beds, I'd say that's probably a safe time, yeah. So.
And you should just drop it to the ground, not compost it.
I mean, depends on what it is and what you've got going on, your own situation. All that leftover material, yeah, it definitely makes great compost. But if you can drop it where it lays and use it as a natural mulch and fertilizer in that garden bed, that's a really effective tool too.
But aren't the larvae and stuff of the pollinators in that material?
Well, ideally, we're cutting that stuff down after those insects have already emerged.
Oh,
So in the springtime, once you start seeing insects hatch out and flying around, it's be happening, anytime now. We're going to be good to go for that. So yeah.
So the example that you showed of that perfectly prepared plot
Yes.
that looked like it was in an existing field.
Mm-hmm.
So did he do another, how do you keep all the stuff that's in the field from just invading that and turning it back into what it was before?
Great question. So ideally, if you've done the right amount of site prep, what is going to have the biggest jump start and the best success is that seed that you've planted. So it's going to more or less outcompete anything that's trying to creep in. You will have some intermixing unless you put up a border. So you put in, some steel landscape edging or something like that. You'll have some grasses creep into your wildflowers, and you'll have some wildflowers creep into your grassy area. But for the most part, in the area where you've done proper site prep and seeded at the proper time, those seeds should get a jump start on any of the other grasses that are just spreading through rhizomes. Yes?
When you do the solarization, then, and you're all done with that, you've done it for the season, you don't till, you just plant right there and cover it with straw or mulch or something?
You might mow, depending on the height, so you might mow first, solarize, and then just kind of depending on what seeds you've got, what weeds you have, how persistent they are, you could do a shallow till and till that material into the ground to prepare. You could try to do a no-till planting. Just depends on how thick the organic material is that's sitting on that area that you've solarized. Yeah. Yes.
What water source did that guy use that tilled that big area?
Great question. So he had a truck with a tank on the back, and I think he watered it just a few times throughout the season. What we've heard from the folks in Lake County, I know slightly different habitat, slightly different climate down in Lake County, but folks are finding if they water the seeds when they first put them down, and then maybe a few other times throughout the summer, that watering is sufficient. They do not have to water it daily like you do a
But
lawn.
for the pollinators though, I mean, they need a water source, so that's.
Right, and I think that guy, go back, I think he's got a creek behind his house.
Like the little woman with her box.
Mhm.
Had like a bowl in there with rocks or something, or.
So yeah, so if you're providing water for your pollinators, it does not need to be in the pollinator garden. A lot of those pollinators can travel a certain distance for that water. So in your packet is some information and some additional resources on how to provide safe water for your pollinators. But this is not something that you absolutely have to do to have a successful pollinator garden. Just like our native pollinators, they are capable to some extent of finding their own water. So don't feel like that's a limiting factor for your garden. Yeah. Anything else? We've got lots of time, yeah. No, we've got lots of time.
I've been watching the pollinators in my garden in South Kalispell, and I'm getting fewer and fewer bees, mostly bumblebees and yellow jackets seem to be there. And the honeybees that I do see seem to be exhausted. They stumble around, they don't seem to know where to go next. Am I making that up? No.
Well, I mean, across the world, we are seeing a decline in pollinators globally. So you may be seeing some more direct effects of that loss of habitat, overuse of insecticides, some of those things that we talked about. You might be seeing that. But I should also throw out a quick plug too. If you guys are interested in some of the issues and the challenges that pollinators are facing, we are hosting a film screening of the movie. It's called The Pollinators. It's on the 27th at the Flathead Lake Brewery downstairs in their community room, the cellar. It's a free event, and the film producers will be there to do a question and answer session afterwards. It's going to be a really great opportunity to learn more about not just the bees themselves, but also the economics and the people that transport honeybees all across the nation to support our agricultural crops and their pollination. So, fun plug for that.
And when again?
Yes, so it's on the 27th at 6 p.m. at the Flathead Brewery in Big Fork, downstairs in their community room. Yeah. And if you want more information on that, sign up for our newsletter downstairs and you'll get all those fun announcements. So, okay, yes, questions?
You were talking about, is it NAR that?
NRCS?
Yes.
So, Natural Resource Conservation Service.
Where are they located?
They're located in the same office as us. So if you know where Joanne Fabrics or the Franz Bakery is in Evergreen, our office is in the USDA building, sort of located right behind that. So come in and chat. We can set up a meeting with both of us or just them, depending on what you're interested in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That deadline for the EQIP program is Friday. So, yeah. Anybody else? Yes.
Where's the artificial pollinator nesting areas?
Mm-hmm.
Do they need shade, and do they need to worry about predators coming after them?
Yes and yes. So with those artificial nest boxes that you have, it can be difficult to get to target that for the correct pollinator species. Sometimes you can get a non-desirable species nesting in that. Sometimes you can get flickers will come in and they'll do what they would do in a tree if a pollinator was nested in the tree and tear your nest box apart and eat the pupae and the larvae that are in there. So that can happen. Depending on which species you're targeting, some of them like shade, some of them like sun. So the artificial nest boxes, those are a challenge. And there's a lot of information online about how to do it properly. But I've also heard from other people that they have had great luck with just putting a couple of those houses out, using whatever materials they have, and they notice almost overnight they've got bees in them, or whatever pollinator species. I also know people that if they've got a big fence post, say it's corner post of their garden or something like that, they've taken drill bits of different diameters and just drilled holes into it to provide different spaces for those nesting pollinators. I've heard a lot of success stories about that too. I haven't personally tried it, so, and I wouldn't recommend doing it in treated wood, obviously. So, yeah. Any other questions?
So is this about the size, when, was it the NRCS or you that will do a plot but only certain, or recommend a plot but only certain?
Yeah, so for our program, we have a limited amount of seeds, so we're doing smaller plots.
And I forget what size you said.
Up to 2,500 square feet. So this is, I don't know exactly what size this plot was, so I don't have that up here. But this was a gentleman that participated in the Lake County program, which is the program that we're expanding up to this county. So same criteria, same seed mix. Yeah.
Okay. So,
No, that's fine, that's fine. That's why we're here.
So now I'll reveal how lazy I am. Do you have recommendations for people that would actually just come and do it for you and then you would maintain it, or you're really expecting us to do the work?
I mean, you are absolutely. That's a good question. Will I go do that? No, I'm not.
For free. I just meant you have a list.
Yeah, there's lots of folks in the valley that can help. If you're doing a pretty small scale area, I think it's easier than you think it might be. If you're doing a larger area like this, I think you could hire a landscape company, or there's a few others out there like Custom Heritage Farming. They help people with different custom farming practices. Obviously, they might be able to come out one afternoon and help, things like that. So there's resources and folks available that could help you with the site prep if you need it. And if you did decide to become a program participant, we could have a meeting about that and get you all lined out on exactly what you were doing. So, yeah.
You could put it out for someone.
All right.
Yes. I thought you had mentioned drilling those holes in your fence posts in the garden. Most of us use treated fence posts.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend trying to provide pollinator habitat in a treated fence post. But, all right, well, I think we're wrapping up. So I don't want to hold you guys hostage if you're ready to go down and get some seeds, but I'll stick around, and if you have any questions, let's chat, or you can come find us downstairs.
Thank you.